Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are now in poem number 6 of the 11 of Seadrift. This is a poem called On the Beach at Night. Now, this one sits right in the middle, and it is the longest poem after Out of the Cradle and Ebbed Ocean of Life. But this one should not be confused with poem number 8, which is On the Beach at Night Alone. Okay, so I just want to make that distinction. Now, our assumptions are that you've been with us working at the LearnStrong.net site. Down that left-hand side, the playlist is Talks with Walt. We've worked everything from inscriptions all the way up to a set of introductory comments for Seadrift, and then we just finished with Ship's Helm. Now, let's turn to our Nortons really quickly to get a little bit of background information. This poem, under its present title, first appeared in the Seashore Memories of Passage to India, 1871, and was transferred to the Seadrift group in 1881. A cross-reference here that's provided is Wordsworth's 1807 sonnet, "It is a beauteous evening, calm and free," for an interesting analogy in sensibility. But the poem that we're going to reference is one we've lectured at LearnStrong.net, Gerard Manley Hopkins' Spring and Fall, and we'll have more to say about that one as we get into this set of lines. So let's now turn to the poem itself, On the Beach at Night. Now, the closest analog in Leaves of Grass will be that moment when a child comes to the speaker in Song of Myself, Passage 6, to ask, "What is the grass?" We're going to see a very similar kind of project happening here, On the Beach at Night. On the beach at night stands a child with her father. So notice, if in the first, the earlier poems of Seadrift, we have mothers, now all of a sudden we're going to have fathers, watching the east, the autumn sky. And obviously this idea of a child with an adult, and then we're kind of a little bit maybe pensive given that it's autumn, watching the east, up through the darkness, while ravine clouds, the burial clouds, in black masses spreading. So you can see a bit of ominous kind of feel here. Lower, sullen, and fast athwart and down the sky, amid a transparent clear belt of ether yet left in the east. And of course this transparent takes us back to Emerson's transparent eyeball of the essay Nature. We talked about this in another set of comments at LearnStrong.net. Ascends large and calm the Lord star Jupiter. Now obviously we're going to have some symbolism with Jupiter as you'll pick up here in a second. And nigh at hand, only a very little above, swim the delicate sisters, the Pleiades. Now our Nortons will tell us that these delicate sisters read brothers, actually, in 1871 and 1876, being corrected in 1881 to conform with the Grecian myth about the Pleiades, the 7 daughters of Atlas, who are placed by Zeus among the stars, hence the name given to a group of stars in the constellation Taurus. So we're going to come back to this Pleiades at the very end as well, all right? From the beach, the child holding the hand of her father. Hey guys, I told you that I think Whitman learned about this hand-holding project from his study of Milton in Paradise Lost. We even read the final lines of Paradise Lost as Adam and Eve are leaving Eden, hand in hand, ready to face whatever is coming. This idea of holding hands, we've seen this referenced as well in Song of Myself, passage 46, with resting the chuff of the hand and all of that. From the beach, the child holding the hand of her father, those burial clouds that lower victorious, soon to devour all, watching silently weeps. And of course, it's interesting because both the burial clouds could be what weeps, but obviously the child is the one that's weeping, and here this fear of what's about to devour all. And obviously, readers of this poem understood right from the very beginning that Whitman was making a very symbolic reference to the fact that so many were concerned that what Lincoln says in the Gettysburg Address, go back and take a look at our comments there on LearnStrong.net, that Lincoln himself was not sure, he himself was not sure that this nation would long endure. And certainly there's great fear. So obviously the weeping of a child is legitimate. Then we get to, and this will sound very much like Hopkins' Spring and Fall, weep not, child, weep not, my darling. In the spring and fall, of course, it's golden glow of unleaving, and the leaves are falling from trees, And of course, the speaker in that poem to the child, Marguerite, will say, it's actually you that you're weeping for, you just don't realize it. With these kisses, we've seen this several times in Leaves of Grass, let me remove your tears, the ravine clouds shall not long be victorious. Obviously, this is the element of hope. Some have called it just blind optimism of Whitman. I've called it informed optimism. They shall not long possess the sky, they devour the stars only in apparition. Jupiter shall emerge, be patient. Now, of course, many read Jupiter as Lincoln, many read Jupiter as America, many read Jupiter as democracy, as freedom, right? Jupiter shall emerge, be patient, watch again another night. The Pleiades shall emerge. We're going to get to the Pleiades as the last word of this poem. They are immortal. All those stars, both silvery and golden, shall shine out. And then a key word here, of course, is again. The great stars and the little ones shall shine out again. Notice the repetition of this word. They endure. The vast immortal suns and the long-enduring pensive moons shall again shine. Then, dearest child, mournest thou only for Jupiter? And again, this sounds so much like Hopkins' Spring and Fall. Go back and look at my lecture on it to get a sense of it. Considerest thou alone the burial of the stars? And then he starts to repeat the word something. Something there is. It's very interesting syntax. Something there is, and then you have the parenthetics. With my lips soothing thee, we're back to kisses. Adding, I whisper, I give thee the first suggestion, the problem and indirection. Notice the interior rhyming of suggestion and indirection. Something there is more immortal even than the stars. And then back to another parenthetics. Many the burials, many the days and nights passing away. We're going to get to so many of these burials when we hit the drum tap section in two sections away. Something that shall endure longer, we're going to come back to the word longer in a second, longer even than lustrous Jupiter, longer than sun or any revolving satellite, or the radiant sisters, the Pleiades. And again, this idea of Pleiades as sisters being read as brothers in 71 and 80 and in 1876. All right, what's going on in this poem? Well, I think that Whitman is speaking to children in the same way that he instructs the child in Song of Myself, passage 46, in the same way that we see it in Song of Myself, passage 6. I have said to you that of those 5 P's of Whitman as we've outlined them, one of those is pedagogue, Whitman is teacher. I think that he's trying to teach to the American public. That is to say what? Well, truth outlasts error. Now to just jump to 2A and messages really quickly. Joy will always outlast sorrow, and freedom, democracy will always outlast tyranny. And I think that the point here is that this is the answer to the theodicy question, why must there be terrible things that happen? Why did the war happen? Why did all the conflict happen? In the end, it's fine. We're all going to be okay. We're going to get through this thing together. Here we have a father speaking to a child and saying, it's going to be all right. At 2B, I like the idea of looking at this as an interesting dialogue form. I think that Whitman was very influenced by Plato's dialogues and this idea of the give and exchange. Here, of course, you have a parent speaking to the child to say, it's all going to be okay. At 3A, one more time, I've mentioned Hopkins' Spring and Fall. Right, it is Marguerite you weep for. Go back and take a look at that to see how he plays the game similarly to what Whitman's playing here. And obviously, Song of Myself, passage 6 is the closest analog. Finally, at 3B, to own a poem like this, do you believe, do you have hope in or for America still? Is this a poem, for example, that can still give you some sense of hope? Or do you think that freedom in the end does and will and must outlast tyranny? Of course, this was exactly the argument that the great Gandhi made, that in the end, only love can outlast any notion of hate. Thank you.